Evander Holyfield just named the three men who brought him closest to the edge, and what he said about them will change how you see his entire career. Most people think they know who tested the real deal the hardest, but Holyfield's own words reveal a truth that's more shocking than any knockout. These weren't just tough fights, they were survival tests, and each one pushed him to a breaking point he'd never experienced before. Here's what makes this so fascinating. Holyfield didn't choose these men because they were famous or because the fights were close. He chose them because they each represented a different kind of nightmare. One overwhelmed him with pure size and skill. Another threatened to end everything in a single moment. The third hurt him with every single punch thrown. Together, these three fighters forced Holyfield to become three different versions of himself just to survive. Let's start with the man who scared Holyfield more than anyone else, Riddick Bowe, Big Daddy, the one fighter Holyfield openly admitted could match his heart and physically dominate him at the same time. When they met in 1992, the world saw something they'd never seen before. Holyfield looked small, not just outweighed, but actually overwhelmed by a man who moved like a middleweight, but hit like a freight train. The numbers tell part of the story, but they don't capture the terror. Holyfield came in at 205 pounds. Bowe was 235. That's a 30-pound difference, and in heavyweight boxing, every pound matters. But it wasn't just the weight. Bowe stood 6 feet 5 inches tall with a massive reach advantage, and he knew exactly how to use it. What made Bowe truly dangerous was that he combined all that size with something rare. He could fight on the inside like a smaller man. Most heavyweights that big are clumsy up close, but Bowe was a technician. He threw brutal combinations at close range, and Holyfield had no answer. Holyfield later said something that should have been impossible for a fighter like him to admit. He was just too big and too good on the inside. Think about that for a second. This is Evander Holyfield talking. The man who built his career on heart, on refusing to quit, on overwhelming opponents with sheer will, and he's saying Bowe was too much. That first fight became legendary for a reason. It's considered one of the greatest heavyweight wars ever fought, and the stats prove why. Bowe landed 357 punches to Holyfield's 242. His jab accuracy was 53% compared to Holyfield's 39%. Bowe didn't just win, he controlled the fight from start to finish. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Bowe's durability was what really broke Holyfield down. Holyfield threw his best shots, the punches that had dropped other men, and Bowe just kept coming. He absorbed everything and kept advancing, round after round, draining Holyfield mentally and physically. By the end of the fight, Holyfield wasn't just losing on the scorecards. He was losing a battle of wills against the only man who could match his courage and overwhelm his body at the same time. Before we go further, if you're getting into this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which of these three fighters you think was truly the toughest. I read every single comment, and I want to know what you think, because what's coming next is going to surprise you. The crazy part is that Holyfield came back. In 1993, they fought again, and this time Holyfield won. He proved he could adapt, that he could overcome even the most physically dominant opponent of his era. That rematch wasn't just about winning a belt. It was about proving he belonged at heavyweight, that he wasn't just a blown-up cruiserweight who got lucky. Bowe was young, skilled, and powerful, and beating him validated everything Holyfield had worked for. That's why Bowe sits at the top of this list. He represented the ultimate physical and technical test, and surviving him required Holyfield to evolve into something greater. The thing about Bowe that people forget is just how complete he was as a fighter. This wasn't some one-dimensional puncher or a guy who relied on a single advantage. Bowe had it all. He could box from distance when he needed to. He could brawl in the pocket. He had a devastating jab that set up everything else. His footwork was surprisingly good for a man his size, and most importantly, he had that rare combination of physical tools and fighting intelligence that made him nearly impossible to figure out. Holyfield spent years fighting at the highest level, facing world-class competition, but Bowe was different. Bowe forced him to confront the reality that sometimes you can do everything right and still come up short simply because your opponent is that good. What made the Bowe challenge even more significant was the timing. Before their first fight, critics questioned whether Holyfield had really proven himself at heavyweight. Sure, he'd won titles, but some said he'd beaten older fighters past their prime. Bowe silenced all of that. He was young, hungry, and at the absolute peak of his powers. When he beat Holyfield, it wasn't a fluke or a bad night. It was a legitimately great fighter defeating another legitimately great fighter. And when Holyfield came back and won the rematch, it proved something even more important. It showed that he could learn, adapt, and overcome even the most devastating loss of his career. That kind of resilience, that ability to face your worst nightmare and come back stronger, is what separates legends from everyone else. Now let's talk about Mike Tyson. Iron Mike. The name alone carried weight, and for good reason. Tyson was a completely different kind of threat. He wasn't trying to outwork you or overpower you slowly. He was trying to end your night in one explosive moment, and he had the speed and power to do it. Holyfield knew this better than anyone because he'd studied Tyson since childhood. He watched him destroy fighters, watched him break their bodies and their spirits, and he understood something critical. With Tyson, one mistake meant everything. Holyfield described it perfectly. Tyson could end it with one mistake. That's a level of danger most fighters never face. It's not about lasting 12 rounds or surviving punishment. It's about being perfect for as long as Tyson was dangerous, which in those early rounds felt like fighting with a bomb that could go off at any second. Tyson's power wasn't like Foreman's slow, crushing force. It was snappy and explosive, fast and accurate, delivered with blinding hand speed that gave you no time to react. His combinations came out of nowhere, and if one landed clean, you were done. What made Tyson even more terrifying was the psychological weight he carried into every fight. Fighters were beaten before the bell even rang. His reputation, his aura, his cold stare during the referee's instructions. It all added up to a mental assault that wore opponents down. Holyfield knew he couldn't afford to let that fear take root, so he approached the 1996 fight with a level of discipline he'd never needed before. He called it perfect discipline, and he meant it. Every move had to be calculated. Every clinch had to be timed right. Every moment of the fight required total focus because one lapse, 1 second of hesitation, and Tyson could end everything. The fight itself revealed the brilliance of Holyfield's strategy. He used his height and reach advantage, standing 6'2.5" compared to Tyson's 5'10". But more than that, he used his strength to bully Tyson in the clinch. Every time Tyson tried to get close and unload those short, explosive punches, Holyfield tied him up. He leaned on him, wore him down, frustrated him. And as the rounds went on, something incredible happened. Tyson's confidence started to dissolve. You could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved. The psychological script flipped, and suddenly Tyson was the one feeling overwhelmed. By the end, the fight was one-sided. Tyson won a few exchanges, maybe the 5th round, but the rest belonged to Holyfield. It wasn't just a victory. It was a dismantling of the most feared fighter in boxing, a man who'd spent years convincing the world he was unstoppable. And Holyfield did it with a combination of mental strength, tactical brilliance, and physical dominance in the clinch. Some people, including fighters like Lennox Lewis and George Foreman, pointed out that Holyfield used rough tactics, headbutts, aggressive clinching, physical intensity that bordered on illegal. But that was part of the discipline. Holyfield understood that to survive Tyson's immediate danger, he had to fight on his own terms, even if it meant getting dirty. The key difference between Tyson and the other two on this list is the immediacy of the threat. Tyson's speed negated reaction time. You couldn't see his punches coming the way you could with Foreman. You couldn't prepare for them the way you could prepare for Bowe's volume. Tyson demanded perfection in the moment, every moment, and that's why Holyfield ranks him as one of the toughest. Even though Holyfield beat him twice, even though Tyson was past his absolute peak, the danger he represented never went away. It was always there, lurking in every round, demanding respect and flawless execution. And then there's George Foreman. Big George. At 42 years old, Foreman should have been a footnote in Holyfield's career. An easy win against a legend way past his prime, but that's not what happened. Foreman brought something to the ring that night in 1991 that Holyfield had never experienced before. Raw, bone-crushing power that hurt with every single punch. Holyfield said it himself. Every punch he threw hurt. Even Foreman's jab felt like a right hand. That's not normal. That's not something you train for. That's just pure, unadulterated strength that bypasses defense and tests your chin, your will, and your ability to endure pain. Foreman's power was different from Tyson's. It wasn't fast or explosive. It was slow, telegraphed, almost methodical. But it didn't matter. When those punches landed, they did damage. Deep, structural damage that accumulated over time. Analysts described it as hydraulic, like a press slowly crushing metal. Foreman didn't need speed because his power was so overwhelming that even when you saw it coming, you couldn't fully defend against it. And if you stood still, if you let him plant his feet and throw, you were in serious trouble. The fight went all 12 rounds, and every single one of them was a war. Holyfield won on the scorecards, unanimous decision, but he paid a price. In the 11th round, Foreman caught him with a looping right hand, and Holyfield went back to his corner genuinely concerned. He asked his team if Foreman had knocked all his teeth out. That's the kind of power we're talking about. A punch so hard that a fighter as tough as Holyfield thought he'd lost teeth. And even after taking that shot, even after surviving 11 rounds of punishment, Foreman was still dangerous. He was still walking forward, still throwing heavy punches, still a live threat until the final bell. What made Foreman uniquely tough was his durability. Holyfield threw everything he had at him. In the 7th round, Holyfield landed a 19-punch combination, clean shots that should have dropped any normal fighter. Foreman took them all and kept coming. He had an iron chin, relentless pressure, and the kind of physical presence that forced Holyfield into a mental and physical chess match just to survive. There was no quick knockout available, no way to end the fight early and relieve the pressure. Holyfield had to go the full 36 minutes against a man who inflicted cumulative, debilitating trauma with every punch. This fight forced Holyfield to prove something critical. Some analysts at the time suggested that Foreman exposed Holyfield's limitations, that he was really just a cruiserweight in a heavyweight's body. But Holyfield shut that down by surviving Foreman's power and winning the decision. He proved his heavyweight strength was legitimate, that he could withstand the most severe test of raw physical force and come out on top. Foreman tested Holyfield's endurance under constant pain, an element that stands completely apart from the acute danger of Tyson or the overwhelming skill of Bowe. So why did Holyfield choose these three men? Because together, they represent the full spectrum of what it means to be tough in heavyweight boxing. Bowe overwhelmed him physically, combining size and skill in a way that neutralized Holyfield's greatest strengths. Tyson threatened him with instant, explosive danger that demanded perfect mental and physical discipline. Foreman hurt him deeply over time, testing his chin, his conditioning, and his ability to endure sustained pain. Each man required a completely different game plan, a different version of Holyfield, and a different kind of courage. Against Foreman, Holyfield needed high-volume punching and constant movement to avoid getting caught by those slow, devastating bombs. Against Tyson, he needed aggressive clinching and mental dominance to smother the speed and stop the explosions before they started. Against Bowe, he needed refined, disciplined boxing to match Bowe's aggression without getting overpowered on the inside. No single strategy would have worked against all three. Holyfield had to adapt, evolve, and become whoever he needed to be to survive. Think about what that means for a moment. Most fighters develop one style, one approach, and they ride it as far as it takes them. The great ones might make small adjustments here and there, tweaking their game plan based on the opponent. But Holyfield did something different. He completely reinvented himself 3 separate times to face 3 fundamentally different threats. That's not just skill, that's intelligence. That's the mark of a fighter who understood that greatness isn't about imposing your will on everyone. Sometimes it's about adapting to survive, about finding new ways to win when the old ways won't work. And here's something else worth considering. Holyfield could have taken easier paths. He could have avoided these fights, picked softer opponents, protected his record, but he didn't. He sought out the toughest challenges available, even when it meant risking everything. That willingness to put himself in harm's way, to test himself against the absolute best, is what made him special. It's easy to talk about being a warrior. It's another thing entirely to prove it by stepping into the ring with men who can truly hurt you. The courage that takes is immeasurable, and it's something that defines Holyfield's entire legacy as much as any belt he ever won. What makes this story even more powerful is understanding the context of the heavyweight division during Holyfield's era. This wasn't some weak period in boxing history. This was arguably the deepest, most talented heavyweight division ever assembled. You had champions and contenders everywhere you looked, all of them dangerous, all of them capable of ending your career on any given night. And Holyfield didn't just survive in that environment. He dominated it by facing the absolute worst matchups possible for his physical frame and style. And that's the legacy. That's why Evander Holyfield is called the real deal. Not because he was the biggest or the fastest or the hardest puncher, but because he willingly faced the biggest, the fastest, and the hardest puncher of his generation and found ways to overcome them. He stood toe-to-toe with men who should have broken him, and instead he broke them. Bowe taught him that size and skill could be overcome with heart and adaptation. Tyson taught him that fear was just another opponent to beat. Foreman taught him that pain was temporary, but victory was forever. These 3 fighters forced Holyfield to prove himself in ways that no other champion had to. They tested every dimension of his ability, every ounce of his courage, and every bit of his strategic brilliance. And by surviving them, by beating them, or at least proving he could stand with them, Holyfield cemented his place as one of the greatest heavyweights who ever lived. His career wasn't built on easy wins or padded records. It was built in the crucible, forged through confrontation with the purest forms of heavyweight danger. So the next time someone asks who the toughest fighters of all time were, remember this. Remember that Holyfield didn't just fight tough opponents. He fought 3 different kinds of impossible and survived them all. That's greatness. That's what it means to be the real deal. And if this story moved you, if it changed how you see Holyfield's career, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who loves boxing. Because legends like this deserve to be remembered, and stories like this deserve to be told. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.